When President Ibrahim Traoré returned from Russia, he didn't just bring home memories, he brought a message. Standing before his people, he said something that cut through the noise. "I learned many lessons from this celebration in Moscow." But behind that calm reflection was a deeper revelation. Traoré saw something in Russia, something powerful, a nation resisting Western domination, and he realized Burkina Faso was fighting the same battle. That's when he reignited a bold idea, joining BRICS, an alliance of emerging powers built to challenge Western control of the global order. But here's the question: can a small West African nation truly enter this elite circle? And if it does, what would it mean for the future of Africa? Let's unravel it. President Traoré's second visit to Russia wasn't just diplomatic, it was historic. This wasn't some routine handshake behind closed doors. This was a clear message to the world. When Vladimir Putin sat down with Traoré, it wasn't as a superior speaking to a subordinate. It was as an equal. Yes, Putin met with other African leaders, from Congo to Equatorial Guinea, but there was something different about this one. The body language, the respect, the symbolism. Behind closed doors, Putin pledged unwavering support, not just for Burkina Faso, but for the entire AES bloc. His promise? To stand with them in the fight against terrorism and in their quest for true sovereignty. What we witnessed wasn't just a meeting, it was the cementing of a powerful alliance. Russia, it seems, has chosen its side, and Traoré, he's no longer just a leader of a landlocked country, he's becoming a symbol of a rising Africa. In a recent interview, President Traoré called Burkina Faso's presence at the May 9th Victory Day celebrations in Moscow very symbolic. But it wasn't just about honoring the past, it was about sending a message. "We want a world of peace," he said, "where nations don't dictate to others what they should do." A quiet sentence, but one that carries the weight of revolution. Traoré wasn't just echoing diplomatic niceties, he was aligning with a vision, the vision of BRICS. Since its formation in 2009, the BRICS alliance, made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has grown into something far more than an economic bloc. It's a challenge to the Western world order, a response to decades of dominance. You see, economic sanctions have become the West's favorite weapon, a silent war tactic used against any nation that dares to resist. But BRICS was born to change that. And now, with leaders like Traoré stepping into the picture, the alliance is gaining not just members, but momentum. From Russia to Iran, China to Zimbabwe, and even Uganda, one by one, countries across the globe have been hit with Western sanctions. The reasons vary, the strategy doesn't. Sanction them, isolate them, break them. That's the playbook. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Countless studies have shown that these sanctions often fail to achieve their goal. They were meant to force submission, to bring nations to their knees and make them bow to Western interests. But instead, they've lit a fire of defiance, a hardened resolve to resist. Nations like Russia, North Korea, and Cuba, sanctioned for decades, haven't backed down. Even with battered economies and everyday citizens bearing the brunt of the pain, these nations have remained unshaken in their convictions. The West hoped sanctions would divide them. What they got instead was unity, a growing alliance of the defiant, determined to build a world where no empire calls the shots. So here's the real question. If sanctions don't work, why does the West keep using them? The answer is chilling in its simplicity. Sanctions aren't just about punishment, they're about control. They serve as a warning, a message carved into the global stage. Step out of line and we will break you. It's not just aimed at the sanctioned nations, it's a show of power to the rest of the world. A silent threat. Look at Cuba, look at North Korea, look at Russia. This is what happens when you defy us. And yes, while these countries have found ways to survive, the scars are undeniable. Their economies have been pushed to the edge, their people have paid the price. The West knows it's not always about bringing a nation to its knees. Sometimes it's about making others too afraid to stand up. And that's where the fear sets in. The fear that you could be next. That fear is exactly what gives the West its power. The threat of economic strangulation forces weaker nations to comply. No protests, no resistance, just quiet obedience. That's the heart of Western hegemony. Take Trump's trade war, for example. It was bold, aggressive, and telling. Out of all the countries caught in the crossfire, only one stood firm: China. The rest, one by one, they caved. They flew in, sat down, and negotiated. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. This is precisely the kind of power dynamic BRICS was built to dismantle. But it's not just about unfair trade or sanctions. It's also about manipulation. The current global system doesn't just favor the West, it enforces its dominance. Over the years, Western powers have quietly influenced the political direction of sovereign nations through powerful institutions like the World Bank. Need a loan? Then you must adopt this policy, pass this law, support this agenda. If you don't, the money vanishes. This isn't aid, it's control, wrapped in the language of development. And BRICS? It's the beginning of a global rebellion. Here's something most people don't know. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have been officially suspended from accessing loans from the World Bank and the IMF. Why? Not because of corruption, not because of mismanagement, but simply because they are under military regimes. These Western institutions claim to uphold the values of democracy, and in their eyes, that's reason enough to cut them off. But let's be honest. If the leaders of these countries were weak, they would have bent. They would have transitioned quickly, bowed to pressure, and handed power to a system approved by the West. But they didn't. They stood firm. And in doing so, they exposed something far more sinister: the way the West has weaponized finance to control Africa. After independence, African nations were left hollow. The colonial powers took everything: wealth, infrastructure, expertise. And when the dust settled, African leaders made a fatal mistake. Instead of enduring short-term hardship and building from within, they reached out for help. They went to the very institutions tied to their former oppressors: the World Bank, the IMF. And just like that, a new kind of chain was wrapped around Africa's neck. This time, it wasn't made of steel, but of debt. When African nations turned to the World Bank and IMF for help, the loans came with strings attached. Tight, invisible strings. The price? Implementation of the Structural Adjustment Policy, or SAP. The West hailed it as the magic formula, a policy that would supposedly jumpstart African economies, unlock industry, and usher in an era of prosperity. Desperate and hopeful, African leaders agreed. They had no idea what they were walking into. Decades later, the truth came out. Research after research confirmed what Africans were already living. The SAP didn't save economies, it sank them. Industries collapsed, public services vanished, and worst of all, a cycle of dependency was born. A trap disguised as assistance, a leash cleverly disguised as a helping hand. And now, countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are doing what their predecessors couldn't. They're fighting to break free. But this story isn't just about debt, it's about power, manipulation, quiet coercion under the banner of development, and all of it led to one inevitable response: BRICS. Formed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS started small, dismissed as an economic footnote. But today, it's shaking the foundations of the world order, a rising alliance with one mission: to create a multipolar world where no single bloc dominates. And now, the West is watching with growing unease. Why? Because its fiercest rivals, Russia and China, sit at the very heart of BRICS, and they're not alone anymore. As of 2024, 5 more countries have joined the bloc. More are knocking at the door. From Africa to the Middle East to Latin America, nations are lining up, not just to join an alliance, but to join a resistance to centuries of control, and perhaps the beginning of a new world. With all this in mind, it's no surprise why the nations of the AES Confederation, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, are now turning their gaze toward BRICS. In the past, such a move would have been unthinkable. These countries were once tightly chained to France, their former colonial ruler, and under that shadow, aligning with an anti-Western bloc like BRICS would have been immediately crushed. Today, the leaders of these nations are not puppets. They are revolutionaries, anti-imperialist, unapologetic, and fiercely independent. Since expelling French troops and cutting off diplomatic ties with Paris, these nations have done something extraordinary. They've reclaimed their freedom to choose. No more foreign dictates, no more silent masters. And now that freedom is guiding them toward BRICS. Russia, a founding BRICS member, has emerged as a vital ally to the AES bloc. Through military support, diplomatic partnership, and a shared vision for a multipolar world, Russia has made it clear Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are not alone. As President Traoré said himself, "We are fighting for a world where sovereign nations decide their own fate." So, when we ask whether Burkina Faso can join BRICS, the answer isn't complicated. It's inevitable. What many don't realize is that Burkina Faso's path toward BRICS didn't just begin in the aftermath of a coup or a shift in global alliances. It started long before the headlines. The real story dates back to June 2023, quietly, strategically, when the Burkina Faso government signed a memorandum of understanding with the BRICS bloc. This wasn't just a handshake, it was a roadmap. A declaration of intent. The MOU outlined cooperation in nearly every critical sector: economy, education, health, infrastructure, energy, transport, air and rail, mining, industry, commerce, tourism, even culture and sports. The message was clear. Burkina Faso wasn't looking for charity, it was seeking partnership. After the agreement was signed, Burkina Faso's then Foreign Minister, Olivier Rouamba, made one thing clear. This was a partnership built on respect and shared benefits. No strings attached, no hidden agendas. From the very start, it was obvious. President Traoré's government wasn't casually exploring BRICS, they were making real moves to join. So when Prime Minister Apollinaire Joachim Kaelem de Tambela later announced that Burkina Faso was ready to become a member of the BRICS alliance, no one was shocked. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was the natural next step in a carefully laid plan. That vision came into sharper focus during a key meeting with Russia's ambassador to Burkina Faso, Igor Martinov. In that moment, the Prime Minister didn't just talk about political ties. He spoke of a transformation. He made it clear, for Burkina Faso, joining BRICS isn't just a strategic move, it's a matter of national survival. He didn't hold back. Burkina Faso, he said, was ready to break free from the dominance of the dollar and the euro. The goal? To build an economy that isn't tied down by Western currencies, but powered by fair and balanced trade. A fresh financial direction, one that reflects Burkina Faso's values and long-term vision. And in Russia, the Prime Minister added, they've found a true partner. From diplomacy to defense, infrastructure to energy, the relationship between the two nations is growing stronger every day. Then came a major revelation. Ambassador Igor Martinov shared something even more ambitious, a proposal for Russia to help Burkina Faso enter the nuclear age. But this wasn't a sudden idea. The seeds had already been planted months earlier. At the 2023 Russia-Africa Summit, Burkina Faso had openly asked for Russia's help in building a nuclear power plant. And not long after that, both countries made it official by signing an agreement to turn that vision into reality. The meeting between the two leaders was, by all accounts, a success. Ambassador Igor Martinov himself called it very fruitful and successful, noting that both sides were aligned in their approach to strengthening cooperation. He emphasized that discussions touched on expanding their partnership across all sectors, from diplomacy to development. Burkina Faso's push to join BRICS shouldn't come as a surprise. It fits squarely within the country's broader strategy to diversify its international alliances and secure a stronger economic future. More importantly, it echoes the collective vision of the AES Confederation, a bloc that champions sovereignty and regional integration across the Sahel. Today, BRICS includes 19 affiliated nations, 10 full members, and 9 partner countries. If Burkina Faso is accepted, it's likely to join as a partner. This would allow the country to participate in BRICS meetings and collaborate on shared goals, though without voting rights or full membership powers. Still, even as a partner, the door to deeper integration would be wide open. But what does BRICS offer to Burkina Faso? Well, the use of the dollar by African countries for trade has severely affected their ability to manage internal challenges because they do not have control over their own monetary policy. This reliance on the dollar is one of the main reasons why the majority of local currencies in Africa, including those of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, are weak and underperforming, contributing to the high cost of living that is now rampant across the continent. It also leaves African markets, which are heavily dependent on commodity exports, vulnerable to global economic shocks, resulting in inefficient trade. However, BRICS has been advocating for a reduction in the use of the dollar in bilateral trade, promoting the use of local currencies instead. If African countries embrace this trend, it could significantly strengthen their economies and stabilize their local currencies. In addition, this shift will help reduce the impact of Western-imposed sanctions. These sanctions are often effective because most countries, including Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, store the bulk of their assets in US dollars, largely due to the petrodollar system, which requires oil to be traded in dollars. However, with growing global calls for de-dollarization, more nations are challenging this system. If these efforts succeed, the West's ability to impose sanctions on countries with opposing ideologies will be significantly weakened. In recent times, more African nations have begun turning away from Western alliances in favor of BRICS. In fact, recent reports suggest that Africa's importance within BRICS is steadily growing, with a rising number of African countries expressing interest in joining the bloc. According to some analysts, the increasing number of African countries seeking to join the BRICS group signifies a strategic shift by the continent aimed at deepening its influence in the global community and securing new economic pathways for the future. These experts have argued that BRICS is becoming increasingly attractive to African countries because it is guided by principles of sovereign equality, inclusiveness, strategic cooperation, and multilateralism. The growing affiliation with BRICS, especially by African countries, is also anchored in the perceived shortcomings of the global unipolar system, which is mostly dominated by the United States and European nations. Ali Khan Sachu, a leading investment banker from Kenya, described BRICS as a lodestar for African countries. In practically every case, it makes sense for these countries to join. He said, African countries need to dilute the influence of Bretton Woods institutions and escape the dollar stranglehold. By joining BRICS, increasing their bilateral trade and increasing settlement in local currencies, BRICS is a win for African countries. Most of the debt advanced to African nations through Western institutions comes with punitively high interests, he said. So far, the China-proposed Belt and Road Initiative has proved that its loans have much lower interest than private Western lenders, he added. According to Ogola, together with BRICS will also help African countries lower the cost of living. This is because Africa can import products like wheat from India or maize from Brazil through government-to-government deals, thereby avoiding intermediaries while keeping the prices affordable. Other areas that stand to flourish for African countries by joining BRICS include trade, especially in value-added and intermediate goods, by moving away from the trade in raw commodities. As earlier stated, the use of the dollars for trade has severely weakened the economy of African countries. But this is why BRICS advocated for de-dollarization policy. The de-dollarization momentum has gained strong standing, so much so that the US president has threatened to sanction BRICS nations if they stop using the dollar. This is the typical response of the US toward any decision that threatens its hegemony. However, with Russia and China at the lead, the BRICS alliance is pushing for the adoption of the use of local currencies for bilateral trade by African countries. The reason for this is that Africa has the population and the resources. If every African country adopts the BRICS policy, it would be more than enough to forever shatter the dominance of the US dollar. Interestingly, some African countries have jumped on the trend. In March 2023, Kenya, though pro-Western, signed an agreement with 3 international oil companies which allowed the companies to buy oil using the Kenya shilling rather than the US dollar. According to the reports from Kenya, this decision has resulted in a monthly saving of 66.8 billion Kenya shilling. In the East African region, the regional bloc EAC has been working hard at creating a common regional currency known as the East African shilling to facilitate regional trade. The African Continental Free Trade Area has also encouraged those involved to conduct business in their local currencies rather than the dollar. And to facilitate this process, the ACFTA is in the process of creating a pan-African payment and settlement system similar to the international SWIFT system, which will enable the use of local currencies in trade among African countries. According to the Secretary General of the ACFTA, some members of the EAC have already started using local currencies in regional trade. In addition to this, recently, one of Africa's biggest economies, Nigeria signed a major trade agreement with India to switch away from using the dollar. According to the agreement, both countries will use their local currencies to conduct bilateral trade in several areas, including energy and transport. So, it's not just Burkina Faso. Every African country should strive to join the BRICS alliance because it is currently the best solution to creating a multipolar world. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel.